I live in a perpetual state of first-person nostalgia in the third dimension. My name is Master Jedi, and I've been playing Quake for 25 years. There is an idea of a Quake II expansion, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real game, only a piece of software, something illusory. And though you may sense its brown textures and its familiar weapon design, and you may feel the soft glow of its lighting and particle effects, it simply is not good. The Reckoning is a mission pack for one of the best games ever made. Today we'd call it DLC, but this new content came in its own box on the shelf. Like DLC, it was farmed out to a different developer with full access to the engine and tools. In this case, Xatrix Entertainment was that developer. Let's see, what had Xatrix done up to that point? Siberia, the PS1 adventure action game. I know I rented that one. I don't remember getting too far.
Turn around nice and slow and disarm the weapon.
What else? Oh, Redneck Rampage. And Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Surely with that team, this game has to be at least interesting, right? Let's start from the beginning. What does id say is in store for us? Circa 2002 from id's website. You are part of an elite commando force. Okay, not a great start. What else does it say? 18 arduous levels to conquer. Arduous. Yeah, you can say that again. My original experience with the expansions for Quake II was a descent into masochism. A journey into the depths of cheap deaths, impossible conditions, challenge to the point of pain. This isn't the kind of difficulty that you feel good when you beat it. A Cuphead or a Dark Souls where your failure is due to skill or execution. No, this is just throwing a shitload of enemies at you without any regard for balance or flow. Not to mention weapons that do literally nothing at all. This was all based on the playthrough I did using Yamagi Quake II. To give The Reckoning its fair shake and to represent the player experience more accurately in 2023, I decided to replay it in the remaster, just to see if the quality of life improvements have any effect on my experience. And I think the best way to cover this mission pack is just to go through it together. The Quake II lore is not the deepest. A simplistic tale of military invasion where lowly grunts can make the difference against an insurmountable apparatus of biotechnical horror. But this expansion takes that thin structural framework and manages to only convey a warmed-up, leftover casserole version of the events of the first game. The player character is a Marine named Joker instead of Bitterman. Same opening, same objectives. Isn't that what you'd want in a level pack? Dear viewer, I would say no. This is the chance to do something out of the box. Everybody knows expansion packs won't be canon or have any effect on the story. Take events from the first game and crank that shit up to 11. But no, we're retreading the same path. At least we start outside, and we've got a new enemy. What could it be? Some new breed of Strogg soldier? Some abandoned experiment gone horribly wrong, left to fend for themselves in the swamps outside the base? No, it's mutants. Just generic, muscle-bound, claw-wielding, acid-spitting mutants called Gek.
This reminds me of that Star Trek where that guy went to that place.
You have an enemy faction that can graft any manner of mechanical devices onto unwilling flesh to create the most horrific melding ever to shamble down a corridor, and they make you fight the bland leftovers of a rejected piece of concept art. At least they were rare enough in the base game to make them a novelty. Let's hope they're also a novelty in this game. Immediately after exiting the swamps, we are entering a sewer level as we infiltrate the Strogg compound. It's a pretty basic series of tubes and interconnected waterways, but it's one of the first areas of the game, so I guess we'll cut it some slack. I will say all the secrets in this area are straightforward and rewarding. We absolutely cannot forget the super shotgun. We hardly get much more for the next few levels, and we're going to need all the help we can get. Now, there's a sequence near the end of this first level where you've pressed a series of switches to get to a switch that's harder to reach. After pressing it, the game tells you, overflow valve opened. Now where could this valve be? Could this have opened up a new path for us? Or is it just some crank sitting on a wall? If so, it's likely underwater someplace. Probably, who knows? Now I know where this valve is because I struggled with this in my original run. For everyone else, you'd be totally lost without the compass. The first real quality of life change that improves not only the expansion, but the base game as well. This guides you straight into the nondescript pipe without any markings at the bottom of a tube that can't easily be seen. We follow up our sewer level with another sewer! At least this one has some tough areas with some elevated kill boxes, not your typical sewer layouts like the last one. To get our first new power-up, we perform a tricky jump off a light fixture onto a massive pipe. This will not be the last time this expansion will play with wall decals as platforms. This is dual fire damage, which is a confusing name, but it doubles your rate of fire when activated. Then into a cramped two-path pipe sequence. I take issue with this ladder. Does it look like any ladder we've seen up until this point? Any indication that it's climbable? No, and yet it's the critical path. A couple more close quarters encounters and then we head back outside. And we've apparently made our way inside the laser grid. We fight through the Strog and we see that the Gek have found a way into the compound. As a first impression, these first few levels hit like a dull thud. Clearly the intention is to give the player something new to experience. These outdoor segments aren't anything like in the Quake II base game. A cave system entirely occupied by native fauna. A compound besieged by that fauna as the Strog industrialized the planet. But this feels like the worst version of that new idea. You could see this area teaching the player how to use a new weapon, a new mechanic that will get used, but none of that happens. It's a tough sell for players looking for something new. Let's continue our journey with the hope of being rewarded with that new experience. Joker has finally entered the base and is on a mission to regroup with the other members of the strike team and retrieve information on the Strog counter fleet. Maybe we'll finally get to interact with some other humans. Oh. Never mind. Hey, look, our first new Strog enemy, the Hyper Blaster Guard. Paint job, new weapon, maybe a little tougher. It's a good add. It builds character. Can be annoying in groups or dangerous if mixed with other enemies, as we'll see. Some of the frustration of playing on Nightmare is starting to set in on this map. You can get to certain sequences and corridors where you're inching along just waiting for something to instantly hit scan you. And that brings us to another significant improvement for the remaster. Adrenaline pickups in the base game were just that, one-time only full health that increased your max health by 1. If you happen to be at full health at the time, well, you're shit out of luck. Now they're an equipment item, ready to use when you need it most. Another essential pickup is in this nifty little secret area where you can nab the grenade launcher. Gonna need that real bad for what's coming up. What's that pod called? The Rampage?
I farted, it's wet, and I don't want to move.
This section features our first encounter with Reckoning Zone Beta Class Brains. This enemy got huge changes in the remaster, so this should be interesting. We also have our second new guard for this expansion, the Laser Guard. Both enemies have hit scan lasers that will melt your health quickly. Combine that with the Brain's chest-mounted grappling hook, and it can be a deadly combination. After we power on this laser to make a hole in the wall, we come to a bullshit killbox section. Not only do we need to navigate through this gap without touching the instant death laser, we've got to somehow deal with the enemies that are through that gap. All of which you don't want to fight close up. So let's just cheese some grenades in there real careful like. Of course, the alarm goes off and we get locked out of our path to the intelligence center. I'll just take care of this ambush real quick. And we're forced to go through the caves nearby. Oh good, more Gek! They appear to be in the middle of something. So our detour takes us through the warehouse. And to get to the warehouse, we need to power up some systems. But in order to do that, we need power cubes. And to get the power cubes, we need to salvage them from the... Apparently the Strog don't want me getting those power cubes as they've decided to throw the heavy artillery at us early. This section is filled with tanks and gladiators while we're just now getting the chain gun on this map. Remember when I said we need the grenade launcher? At least we've got plenty of shells, so we end up doing a lot of grenade launcher and super shotgun dancing behind cover as we fight our way around and into the geothermal reactor. I think the remaster might have made tanks more dangerous by changing their damage outputs and firing patterns. I find myself losing a lot more health than I'm used to. Let's see if the trap works in this version. Traps don't work on tanks. Let's see what the manual tells us about traps.
Are you sure about that?
So how does somebody in 1998 figure this out? Like, I know it because I tried it, and then I looked it up in the wiki and confirmed it. But the game only gives you 5 of them for the entire expansion. That's certainly not an encouragement or an endorsement to experiment. There is one enemy that they're useful against later in this game. We'll get there, but it's a logical leap that doesn't make any sense. So we double back with the power cubes, power up the pumping station, and we get a comically large swinging pendulum area over a pit of lava, like something we'd commonly find in Quake I or the NSEA Protector.
What is this thing? I mean, it serves no useful purpose for there to be a bunch of choppy, crushy things in the middle of a hallway. No, I mean, we shouldn't have to do this! It makes no logical sense! Why is it here?
I feel bad for the guy who has to move something to storage in the warehouse if the primary door is out of order. This area feels more like a fish tank. It's got several canal areas and swimming sections. They could have just called it a pumping station. It would have made just as much sense. We finally get our rocket launcher, and boy would that have been helpful in the last map. My second time through this game, I'm learning to manage my resources a little better. That includes jibbing bodies so that the repair bots can't resurrect them, and finding body armor whenever possible. Computers! Large data cores and stuff. And we're introduced to our last new guard variant wielding an ion ripper, and we get one ourselves. Though I'm not big on using cell ammo on anything other than the energy shield, I will say that this gun is better than the Hyper Blaster. More controlled ammo spending and can be fired faster without the spin-up time. The rest of this level really just functions as a hallway to the game's first boss, which is a pair of beta-class super tanks, a new enemy for the Reckoning, which is a variant of the base game's boss. The beta class has shields and is more nimble and heavily armed than the walking tanks. Taking out shields will become essential to survival and battling attrition in this game's later levels. The best way I've found to do this is use the Ion Ripper on the shield, then do maximum damage with your other weapon options. Believe me, I know what happens if you decide that the cell ammo trade-off isn't worth taking out the shields. More on that later. We find out that the Strogg counterfleet is positioned on the moon of the planet. So after learning this information, we decide the best thing to do is to take out their fuel production facilities. Oh boy, an industrial area! Never seen that one before! Yeah, I knew this game was getting a little too colorful. Time to fall back into our groove and overload the senses with some maximum brown. This area will serve as the first true central hub of this expansion as we backtrack through it for various reasons. Unlike the design, the combat in this area is dynamic. We've got a couple super tank arenas backed up by Icarus flyers, then some gunner, guard, enforcer combos on multiple elevations. You know what really saves a lot of these encounters from being a miserable slog? Is the remastered weapon switching. Holy shit, does that make a huge difference. Especially with these new guns that were double bound in the original Reckoning. Every switch needed to be planned by getting behind cover because the guns took so long to swap. Now you can just flick the mouse wheel Quake III style. This section does introduce us to the worst gun in all of existence, the bane of my experience with this expansion, the Phalanx Particle Cannon. What a horrible piece of delayed fire bullshit. Damage output and rate of fire is inferior to the rocket launcher. The 2 shots are delayed when you press the trigger, and they decided to make those 2 shots have their own random spread pattern. The worst, by far, is the sound the gun makes while it's idle. It's an ear-scraping, low-volume screeching noise that sounds like a sonic anti-rodent thing you plug into the wall. So the green keycard we picked up gets us into this area where we are on a mission to find a red keycard to double back to the refinery area. The outer base is one big combat sequence where we get to fight our way through a few different combinations of enemies. It gets pretty thick in the middle here, and I may have panicked just a little bit and used a quad damage to get through the worst of it, but I don't regret it. One notable acquisition, weapon-wise, is my darling, the railgun. So grab the key, head back to the industrial area, and we need to find the red door. Pathfinding was never really a huge issue with the Reckoning, but thankfully we can save ourselves about 10 minutes of running around by using the compass. This area has lots of acid, and even our enemies aren't safe. Using an equipment item to pick up a duplicate always feels slightly inefficient, but at the same time it feels perfectly optimized somehow. Joker has been tasked with destroying this sea of caustic fuel to prevent the launch of the Strogg counter fleet. To do this, we need to plant an airstrike marker so the target can be taken out by our air support. This section sees the introduction of the Beta-class Iron Maidens. Rockets that seek the player are the new addition, like the Vors of old, but not nearly as deadly. This is also a great area to keep our ammo and armor supplies well stocked by raiding secrets with strategic use of the environment suits.
Back leader of Recon 4, airstrike marker stolen by GAC raiding party. GAC's heading back.
The GAC stole the airstrike marker?
What do you mean they cut the power? How could they cut the power, man? They're animals.
The detours continue, thanks to my favorite enemy. Back through the outer base, into the refinery where more enemies have spawned, and we make our way to the water treatment plant. This feels like a third sewer level. Nope, we're not doing it. Get it off the screen, not my joke. Strangely reminiscent of a level you'd see in Jedi Knight, but that could just be my own head. Good opportunity to use the railgun on rooftop enemies as well as from that elevated position. A couple more creative secrets that we can't miss. Don't do what I did and forget about the invulnerability power-up in this second pipe. It's the only one in this expansion that doesn't need a rocket jump, and it will make your final boss fight much easier. Once we get through a couple swimming sections, our pursuit of the GAC continues into the Badlands. Didn't we fucking start in this area? At least this time we've got more weapons to deal with the GAC. Of course, the one time I try to break progression with a rocket jump and we've got invisible walls all of a sudden. After a strangely familiar series of caverns, we see that the GAC have been worshipping the airstrike marker. But I must uphold the Prime Directive and eliminate this religion before it corrupts their culture. So we're led right into the back way of the refinery, where we plant our marker, glass the planet, then we can mop up. Wait, just time out for 1 second. Aren't we supposed to be a recon squad? And somehow we've become responsible for taking out the entire fuel production facility with one dude. Oh, and some air support. I just think maybe they should have sent down like 1 or 2 more dudes, like if they had taken someone who left the blue key on some pipes. Did some Strogg just yeet it up there so no one would find it? I mean, the last key, the red key, was like in a special room. It had a special console. It had a little cabinet you had to open up. Well, we can use that ill-placed key to catch our train to the spaceport, where we can hopefully find a transport to the moon base. Okay, now this is getting interesting. It only took us 3 units of sewer levels and detouring to get here. Nothing too challenging or interesting in this level. The Reckoning has a shitload of crate-based jumping puzzles, so I keep having to endure a symphony of echoey Quake jump sounds.
There's a foul voice on the air.
I think the remaster cranked up some of those post-processing sound localization effects. Footsteps, too. So we hit a couple of switches, find an elevator, and then we're on to the hangars. Just like the warehouse, I have to take issue with the level naming in this unit. This area, the hangars, is home to the live food processing assembly line, where, presumably, humans are loaded into cargo freighters for shipment to the moon base. Could have just called it that. The Strogg funnel you into a few kill boxes, with hit scanners flanking you from an elevated position and railguns on the ground. Gunners sprinkled throughout. With this combination of enemies and options you have as a player, I thought the combat in this section was about as good as it gets in this expansion. I'd even call it fun, and I'm starting to think the remaster features have a lot to do with that. We jump into a cargo container and stow away on the Strogg freighter, which will take us up to the moon base. Low gravity map, pretty rare, so it's worth noting. Right away we're in a close quarters battle, so use of cover is key. And a little luck. At the top of the catwalk we meet our first beta class gladiator. Remember when I said taking out shields would be essential? These assholes are the reason why. They will be our primary antagonists for the rest of this game. Energy weapons like the Ion Ripper will melt off their energy armor just like the beta class super tanks. But here's the terrible secret of the remaster. Energy weapons deplete the energy armor twice as fast. The original Reckoning did not have this. That's right, you had to try to get through all 1,700 hit points of these bastards with standard weapons. Traps are supposed to be effective against them, but I don't know how you're supposed to figure that out because they're not effective against regular gladiators. Compare this first fight to the original game. One fight I end up with lots of cells remaining, and the other takes everything I have. This is a war of attrition that the original game did not consider or hold your hand through. The remaster has made these last few levels significantly easier to deal with. Is that a bad thing? Dear viewer, let's find out together. We proceed through the ship as it continues to be a close quarters battle with some heavy hitters. The whole level is really cool. It's a sprint of an area with some neat textures, battles, sequences. It's a great penultimate level before we hit the moon base. There's a fight with 4 tanks up near the bridge, and facing them head on is a death sentence. Unless you spend your quad damage because you're impatient. This may have been a mistake. Killing those tanks enables the self-destruct sequence, and it seems like somebody might have watched Alien right before making this level.
Emergency destruct system is now activated.
Unlike the movie, we can abort our sequence and make it safely to our destination. Terminate all opposition. I think we've officially gone far beyond our original orders of recon and we're into Arnold Commando territory. I don't think I'll ever get sick of low-gravity maps in Quake. The cargo bay is a bit of a letdown, if I'm honest. It's got some memorable features like this first area, this circular hallway area, and this rotunda. They've got a really cool looking skybox that you can only see in one spot. That's a major tease. The beta class gladiators, as I said, continue, and holy shit is this area easier. I can actually manage my resources. I have choices. I'm not constantly strapped for ammo. And we finally get our BFG. Can't say it'll be useful with the new energy shield strategy, but it is comforting to know it's in the inventory and we have a full loadout. And now we enter the final-ish level to deactivate some induction coils and take the core offline, thus destroying the moon base and disabling the counter fleet. We've got to navigate some moon ice caves with the low gravity mechanic, and thankfully the Gek haven't followed us up here, so we can actually enjoy it. The caves allow us to get into the induction coil room, take out the gladiators there, then onto the final command arena where we can take the core offline after fighting more gladiators. You can see how this would become punishing after a while if you weren't able to take out their shields. But of course, there is one last attempt to stop us by none other than the Jord-Macron pairing from the base game. There is no explanation as to how Macaron survived, or how they came to be on this moon base. Or was this before Bitterman's mission? If that was the case, how did they end up confronting Bitterman? In any case, this fight is a little tougher without invulnerability, which we missed earlier, or quad damage, which we impatiently used earlier. So I would recommend saving both of those power-ups for this boss fight, just like any other in Quake II. So after we take them out, the core starts to go nuts. We run back to the cargo bay, fight through a few more beta class gladiators, and then we're home free. This is really where I was begging for death in the original Reckoning. It seemed like this game would never end, and I'd be forever tormented by the gladiators. And thus ends Joker's story. He is never mentioned again.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
So my original assessment of this expansion pack was an awful pit toilet of organic shit soup. All the ammo for the effective weapons dries up on the bullet sponge enemies with the energy armor, and you're forced to endure the ear-shattering buzz of the phalanx, since it's the only ammo type that gets dropped by the beta-class gladiators. Safe to say, the remaster has corrected this. I never thought I'd run through this game again, let alone on Nightmare, but I must say I enjoyed the experience much more this time. The quality of life changes have taken this game from an unplayable brown mess to a decent run-and-gun remix. The new enemies and weapons, except for the phalanx, are unoffensive and even fun to use. I like most of the new enemies, and the combat sequences in this game are genuinely fun. What I can't excuse is this feeling of shallowness, maybe lacking in soul. The original game had that wink, that X factor, maybe something tongue-in-cheek. There's something about the story of Quake II that sets the tone and combines with the level design to produce an intangible characteristic. This expansion just doesn't achieve that. It's played as straight as possible and minimizes the involvement with your Terran Coalition counterparts. Radio chatter at an absolute minimum in this, and doesn't feel like a coordinated invasion anymore. All you get is a computer telling you to go blow this thing up. They're the enemy. It's a regression to a more simplistic iteration, almost like just going through the motions. This is often what Quake II is criticized for. This expansion pack may be one of the worst Quake games, but it shouldn't be controversial to say that even a bad Quake game is still better than a lot of shooters out there. Let's see if that still holds true for our next little adventure.